Over Q2, I think we did 40 audits for different consumer businesses, majority of them doing 8 figures a year and above. It certainly seems to be a shared pain, shared narrative. We brought on an account that hadn't defined those audiences correctly and then didn't know they were spending 41% of the budget on repeat customers. Those are like the 5 big errors.
It's all about how you can create a creator flywheel and lower your cost per creative. I think has over 500,000 affiliates now that work directly with them. There's this kind of constant debate about volume versus intention. You can have volume with intention. So firstly, thinking about persona coverage, how many distinct persona clusters do you have? Now, obviously this differs based on your volume of spend. If you look at these identity angles in your ad account, I would say probably 90% of your creative is in actual self.
Another point that's like all over Twitter and quite common narrative right now is this like distaste for iterations. We've not done a solo in a while.
I feel like every time we do a solo, we say the same thing now.
Too many guests, even though they do the best.
I know.
I think the last one we did was a Q1 recap, so 2.5 months in, 2.5 months later.
Yeah, we're back. Lots to catch up on today. Some just lots going on in the market anyway. So we can maybe start there.
Yeah, loads been going on since we last spoke. Even in the last week, it feels like there's been a lot happening.
Yeah, the World Cup started.
SpaceX have IPO'd.
Yeah.
The government have pulled back Claude's model.
I know, which is really sad because I was doing a lot with Fable, and then like the chats that I was working within it would just like stop letting me use it entirely.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't get a chance to use it too much because I was away, but from what people are saying, it just sounded like a crazy model. Oh, it's weird that that's not made like mainstream news.
I know.
Like it's not been on any news outlets in the UK at least, because I was looking and it's like nobody's really mentioned it, other than unless you're like really deep in the weeds of like AI, I guess, tech and Twitter.
Yeah. I wonder if it's got anything to do with Anthropic not being, a far right
I think I was reading the thread on this, so I'm not going to claim that I made this statement, but someone was making the point of like, are they working towards the concept of regulatory capture? So like the US government capture part of the company and then that creates a monopoly because they're obviously government backed. I also just think a lot of their marketing has sort of pushed this. It's like all they do is talk about how crazy the model is, how it's going to destroy everyone's lives and work.
Yeah.
So it's not that surprising, but how did you find using it briefly?
Yeah, I mean, again, similar to yourself, only really just started getting into it and really didn't even probably go near the kind of level of capability that it had.
It's expensive.
But yeah, that's the one thing that I noticed pretty quickly. I know Josh, who works at Saw Group, who heads up a lot of our kind of code and builds that we're doing with AI. I know he was absolutely rinsing tokens.
Yeah, it's like, I think it was subsidised until, it was going to be subsidised until the 22nd, then move on to API. And I think he was using like £4,000 a day in tokens. He actually one-shot an app that got to number 1 in the app charts.
Yeah, that's crazy.
With like 60, 70,000 downloads. So shout out to Josh for getting stuck in.
Before we get back into it, let me ask you one question. How much did you spend on meta ads last month? For a lot of you listening, it's probably quite a lot, but how much of it actually came back to you? If the answer is nothing, you're going to want to keep listening. Incard is a financial platform built specifically for modern digital businesses. The thing most people will fixate on is the fact that you can get uncapped cashback on all of your expenses. Because unlike a lot of these programs where the categories are pretty much useless to all of us, Incard gives you 2% cashback on things that actually make up your cost base. Things like SaaS, ad spend, travel, and lots more. The things that you're just going to pay for anyway to allow your business to run and grow. Money back on your existing outgoings. And if you're anything like most of our clients, that's going to be a lot. And it's going to add up fast. But it's not just cashback. Corporate cards with multi-currency accounts, a proper connected banking experience, and direct integrations with things like Shopify, Xero, Stripe, and lots more. all in one place. And if you've ever had 15 tabs open, working from about 3 different bank accounts, and a spreadsheet that nobody's touched in 3 weeks, just trying to get a full picture of where your money actually is, then that's the problem that this solves. One connected view, your whole financial experience in one place. Brands like Asio Beauty and Hello Paris are already scaling with this. So if you're spending serious money on daily expenses and getting absolutely nothing back on it right now, you're going to want to look into this. Back to the episode.
I think this is interesting. Like, I've just built another doc around our AI strategy, and we are going to move out of this like heavy subsidized era. And I think like you've got model abstraction and how they change over time, but also like how you route different requests into different models based on this, like the complexity of the ask. So like Opus, for example, isn't very good at making plans and like creating a plan of how to achieve an outcome, whereas Mythos from limited use seem to be very good at that. So it's like, do you set up a system that balances cost where Mythos builds the plan, Opus executes on it?
Yeah.
I think there's going to be many layers to that with so many different models. It's a bit like how you do it with creative generation, where you're using like 5 or 6 models.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, I've listened to a podcast with Anthropic's CFO recently, and he said that like when Opus came out, no one moved from Sonnet to Opus because they just didn't really understand how much better it was, and because it was that much more expensive. So they actually brought they made Opus a lot cheaper to get people over to it, and it's almost like a strategy. So then when you're on it, you kind of don't leave. But actually that was like the kind of law of accelerated returns, and the compounding effect of more people going on to Opus actually meant that they drove a lot more revenue for their business anyway.
Yeah, really interesting. I guess like usage goes up as the quality of output goes up.
Yeah.
That CFO is great as well.
Yeah,
he should
really
be
interesting.
He should be the spokesperson for Anthropic, I think. He's
I
so
agree.
much better than the CEO.
I agree. Yeah, he's super interesting, really, really interesting guy. But yeah, his we can get onto that in a bit. But it was a great podcast on invest like the best that everyone should listen to with him on.
SpaceX,
yeah,
IPO, 1.7 trillion. I saw it went up 20% yesterday. I saw a tweet this morning that said the value of the company had gone up $420 billion in a day. It was the single biggest value increase in a day in the stock exchange's history. And it increased Elon Musk's net worth more than what Warren Buffett has earned in his whole career.
It's crazy. Well, I saw something saying that the average American now is closer in wealth to Jeff Bezos than Jeff Bezos is to Elon Musk.
It's mental.
But yeah, to put it into perspective, and like I saw this on Twitter, but like, so it made 4,400 millionaires and 400 over 100 worth over $100 million. And then if we just like put into perspective like how much a trillion actually is, 1 million seconds is 11.6 days, 100 million seconds is 3.17 years, 1 billion seconds is 31 years, and 1 trillion seconds is 31,700 years.
Yeah, that's mental. It's just crazy how much like value creation Elon Musk has managed in his career at this point. It's we are going to get into the juice of Meta, all things DTC, but just a couple of other topics to touch on before we do that. You mentioned you put down here the Levi arena.
Did you see this?
I did. I think it was cool, but I do think they could have done it better.
I agree. Well, I think it's the start of. I think they're going to do more with it because it feels like they're going to. This is kind of the start of a campaign. But essentially, for context, is it called the Levi's Arena?
Yeah, Levi Stadium or Levi
Stadium. One of the stadiums in the US. Obviously, we're at the World Cup now, and FIFA. Obviously, if you're not like an official FIFA sponsor, they're not going to let you have any form of free publicity. And being, the Levi's Arena, they had to essentially remove the name temporarily during the tournament. So what they did which was super smart, was essentially, I don't know if you know, like the Levi's logo it's got the word Levi's inside the red, or it's almost like a bat shape. So they just left the bat shape and then just put like, something white over it that covers it, but it kind of perfectly still leaves the shape. And then they changed that icon to their social media icons. And I think they're working through a lot of other stuff there. But I just thought super interesting way of, kind of just taking the piss, but then also building, just building a bit of hype around something that was a negative, turning it into a positive.
They need to turn it into a pair of jeans next. Like a jean pocket, like back pocket of the jeans, something like that, just to take it that next step further. But yeah, it was a really smart approach to covering it up. So crazy that when you compare, I was reading about the US World Cup versus like previous, and how like FIFA, that's an example of like FIFA having impacts on like sponsorship. And if you look at Russia and some of these other countries where previous World Cups, like FIFA would only let them sell one type of beer, Russia had to give everybody with a ticket a visa for the country for the period of the tournament. It's just interesting to contrast how the power shift into America. What you think of it is, I'd leave to everybody's interpretation, but it's just so clear that the power is more with the host than previous, where Russia obviously had a lot to gain from, probably more to gain from hosting a World Cup, and therefore gave up a lot of concessions in comparison to America, where they're hiking up like travel prices, all sorts.
You can't get a ticket for less than $1,000.
Yeah, denying entry to referees, all sorts of stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild.
Before we jump into all the juicy DTC stuff, just like to always do this. Best bit of content you've watched since the last episode?
Yeah, I think jumping on, kind of following on from what I just said, that Krishna Rao, the CFO of Anthropic, I think, well, I thought the whole podcast was just really interesting because it really puts into perspective, like actually, especially from his perspective, how difficult it is to predict the growth of like an AI company like Anthropic, because it's multi-layered in terms of forecasting, right? So you're having to forecast demand. So, how many people are actually going to use the product. Then you have to, off the back of that, reverse engineer compute. So having to essentially make a bet on how much computing power you'll need. If you over forecast and you have too much, you've spent hundreds of billions of cash flow that you didn't necessarily have, and that could literally put the company under. Or if you're under, then you're not going to have enough to actually serve the consumers that use your product. And then a deeper layer than that is capability. And there was a really interesting question asked. There's one thing like trying to predict demand, but then trying to predict the capability of a model, which, they don't necessarily know how it's going to change and how the models are going to evolve. So then having to kind of predict that. So then I was like, it kind of made me think it's an interesting thought process of scenario planning capability, similarly to how you would scenario plan a forecast and demand for your business. So, we're talking a lot about how we approach the next evolution of building kind of services as software almost, like in terms of what we're doing with the agency. And it's very difficult, like if I'm looking 6 months down the line to say, okay, how can I resource plan or look at, okay, what does the org look like, when it's very hard to predict what capability looks like, because that is going to impact, the resource that we need or have in the business. So really like thinking of it through, we need to set a best, base and worst case scenario of what capability looks like through the lens of AI, setting that KPI, something around efficiency. So in this case, to make it simple, like cost per creative, you have a best case, a base, and then a worst case, and you have a scenario built for each of those cases. So therefore, if you've got the North Star of where you want to get cost per creative to, that also becomes the influence and the direction that you take with all of your AI builds and what we do as an agency versus doing things that are shiny and pretty but don't actually add any real IP to what we are doing. And then as a result, it's not only given the direction that we need to take, and keeping us on the straight and narrow, but also we can plan for each of those given scenarios, which is going to impact things like resource.
Yeah, I think I listen to this as well. I think just don't envy the complexity that he's facing and how difficult a challenge that role must be. I think it must be the same in all of those businesses that are just investing so much capex, taking such big bets. So I like that the way you've like then applied that to our business and how we're thinking about it. It's really hard to build for like the slope of change. So I think you do have to build multiple scenarios and reflect quite regularly on how we're pacing towards that. I also liked another episode of that same podcast. We may be sending people away from our own videos by talking about this. Brian Chesky did another episode on like AI founder mode and how he approaches one-to-ones. And I think I'm not going to go into it because I'm conscious of time, but super strong episode on how he runs Airbnb, how he changed the approach. I think we've mentioned him a few times on here at this point, but just really enjoyed that ep as well.
Maybe give like a top, just like what's your biggest insight from that episode? Because he's just super compelling, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a really good storyteller as well. I really like the way he does. He's like, they've just done they do those product releases every half of the year, and I always find them really, it's the closest thing to like Steve Jobs Apple type videos, I think, from a CEO currently, and the way they tell a story, the way he presents the releases, and he uses that as a forcing function for pace of progress in the company by setting those 2 points in the calendar that they have to then hit the summer editions launch. And I think quite a few businesses do that now. I guess my insight, he just completely changed the way he ran Airbnb through COVID and then has continued to do that beyond that. So completely stripped out the concept of one-to-ones. He's very, very in the weeds of a lot of the business and not all the time, but still manages to retain like a cross-sectional level of understanding of every area. And I think it's similar to Elon Musk as well. Like he's very in the weeds and of engineering, finance, the whole company.
Yeah, he looks at things through a very different lens, I think, to most people. Like almost like in a controversial way. Like, you know, one thing that was interesting on that, he was saying about you shouldn't give control to anyone or the freedom and power to give them the freedom until they earn that.
Yeah,
essentially. So he's almost like he will start by micromanaging them and then slowly, you know, pull back over time.
Yeah, really interesting. Very different way of approaching. I think you've got to take some things and maybe not everything from it, but just find him very, very compelling to listen to. So moving into Meta DTC, what everyone's probably come to listen to. I wanted to set the scene before we jump into, I guess, we wanted to go through probably 8 or 10 different things that we're seeing really work right now and drive value for brands. Over Q2, I think we did around about 40 audits for different consumer businesses, majority of them doing eight figures a year and above. So loads of context. Obviously, we've got our own client base as well, where we can pattern spot and surface insights. But I think the broad setting of the scene is that I think it's been quite a challenging environment since March. So if you're watching this and you're finding it difficult, more difficult than it has previously been on Meta to acquire customers, I think you're not alone. It certainly seems to be a shared pain, a shared narrative. Obviously in March we saw the platform roll out a number of attribution changes, so changing the model away from 7-day click, 1-day view. It seems like since then they've been continuing to roll out a number of different like back end and front end changes that just have thrown the algorithm off. From what we can see, we've seen audience network issues. So again, if you haven't done this already and you're watching, we've seen a big spike over Q1 of percentage of spend delivered through audience network placements, and that massively inflating traffic, and that traffic being a lot of bots or just really low quality. And then that's created a signal that's impacted the pixel and then worsened performance over time. We've also seen like a more recent issue where ad spend concentration has just seemed to skyrocket over the last week or two, where less like a lot of ads have just seemed to drop off to zero spend, and a low volume of ads have started to take more spend, and we're having to be a bit more aggressive with how we force budget through certain assets. And we've seen an issue with related media, which you need to check across your accounts. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail because we're looking into that at the moment. And I guess you've got all of that sat in the backdrop of pretty poor consumer confidence as well in the markets. It's definitely a challenging time for brands. So hopefully we can go through a few things that we're seeing work within that, that you can try and take and implement to maybe offset some of those problems. But definitely not alone if you are struggling or finding performance to be a bit softer right now.
We're all in this together.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. You don't want to. I always think you control what you can control.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But I think it's definitely the narrative we're seeing on Twitter. You can feel it in accounts, and I think there's just been a lot of fundamental problems on the platform, outliers, some of the things I mentioned that just shouldn't really be happening, that you need to be cognizant of.
I don't know if they've changed something with their like flagging system as well, which is obviously like this AI flagging. Wrong hole there, mate.
Sorry, say that again. It's choked.
Yeah, because I think I've had about 6 conversations in the last week with, and this happened with Club Neuro as well, just like the most random videos just being flagged as something that, like one of our ads was just flagged with selling edible cannabis. Another one for fraudulent work activity. Like the weirdest thing. And then I've had like 5 other conversations with people that have said the same thing. So again, maybe that's a coincidence, but
just feels like they're making a lot of changes. Like, and whenever they make a lot of algorithm changes, and I don't know, you can only speculate to what that is. Like there's so much of the platform we don't have visibility of, but these issues, there's periods where this sort of stuff happens. It's just been very noticeable over the last couple of months. Despite that, there are still some clear trends, clear things that we're seeing work. I would also say there's some common mistakes across audits, and I wanted to pick out and start with like 5 really key errors that we're seeing the vast majority of brands that we're looking at through this process making consistently, that are contributing to poorer results. And a lot of these are quite quick fixes. Some of them are a bit more structural and strategic. But I just wanted to whiz through them just because I think it's important to then to reflect on your ad account setup and just see if these are things that you're maybe missing in your setup and something that you can implement to generate some quick wins. Firstly, attribution. So I think this is an issue that has really reared its head since that change in March. A lot of ad accounts are still including view through as a attribution window. So maybe running 7-day click, 1-day view. I think we've touched on this a few times. If you've got a really big repeat customer component, you'll be pulling through a lot of conversions that would have happened anyway. You'll be forcing Meta to be less incremental. So we need to be stripping that out. I'd say that's a problem on nearly every account we look at the moment. Just too much spend going through view through. Some accounts should have it. Most accounts shouldn't. So stripping that out is a really quick win. Secondly is like engaged audiences. So making sure that we've got really strong definitions at an account level that give you clarity over where you're spending your budget, whether it's engaged, existing, or new, and trying to force more and more towards new. We want to define that on an account level, but then we want to apply exclusions the right way depending on where the account's at. So we don't want to exclude engaged from every campaign because I think ASC is getting better at sequential ad delivery. So like top of funnel, then a retargeting ad, walking someone through that customer journey in one campaign. We want to increase the like level of exclusions on a campaign basis depending on how much of a reach problem we're facing. But definitely defining it on an account level is really important. Funnel coverage, so creative, like still, I'd say 90% of the brands are not making enough problem aware ads. which I think we've been talking about for maybe 12 months now. And I think we're going to come on to some stuff there shortly. Concentration, so creative concentration. Like most of your spend being through a low volume of ads that have very common features, whether that's persona, format. I think that's a problem today and a risk for the future. And then I'd say the final one would just be landing pages that just sell a product but don't sell like an outcome. I did an audit recently, and it was a really well-known, pretty large brand. And I think because I'd come at it from like I wasn't as close to the problem, just it was so easy to like look at their page and be like, this is too technical. It's missing these fundamental elements that would appeal to the consumer. And it's just really having that consumer-centric mindset when you're looking at your customer journey. Yeah. Not thinking too much like a brand.
This happens all the time. Like we've done it before where you think the route is to go very expert driven and it doesn't cut through. And then you dumb the language down like you're trying to speak to a 5-year-old and suddenly, it starts working.
Yeah. There's a website. Is it Hummingbird? Humming something? I've definitely got that wrong. But basically there's a website where you can put your text in and ask it what its reading age is. And if you look at newspapers and like some of the biggest publications in the world, like New York Times, for example, will be written in like grade 7 reading age. But then you'll look at like a product page and you'll be writing like a technical expert. You'll have all this jargon that no one really cares about or understands, and just simplifying and thinking more through the lens of a customer.
I think that's why like the ads that you always see doing really well right now are the ones that are just like visual metaphors.
Yeah, easy to understand.
Yeah, like, representing something by showing sugar emptying a jar, really simple, but visually encapsulating.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a huge problem. So I would even say for scripts, like going through some of your top performers and seeing if you can put it into, I can't remember the tool, we'll link it below. Put it in, see what it says. If it's like quite technical, just simplifying the language, reproducing it probably would help with iteration and
go back to the story, the script writing masterclass I did, because I do a whole section on that and how to speak like a 5-year-old essentially. But one that really helps with that is bringing in those visual metaphors. Yeah. It's like your gut is like a traffic light. It lets the good stuff, the green lets the good stuff through, red keeps the bad stuff out. Things like that are just super simple, but you instantly resonate with it and you know what that means.
Yeah, Claude's really good at writing metaphors as well. But yeah, those are like the 5 big errors. Just to paint a picture of how big that engaged audience piece is, we brought on an account that hadn't defined those audiences correctly and then didn't know they were spending 41% of the budget on repeat customers. So you can imagine just reorientating that spend completely transform their performance. So those are the problems. Those are the common errors. We've now got about 6 or 7 things that we want to talk through on like how we're seeing best-in-class brands fix them. And I know you wanted to start with the Hudson Method, definitely not named after me, named after the Comfort founder who pioneered this. Great name. But yeah, would you want to dive through like how you're seeing this work?
Before we get back into it, let me ask you one question. How much did you spend on meta ads last month? For a lot of you listening, it's probably quite a lot, but how much of it actually came back to you? If the answer is nothing, you're going to want to keep listening. Incard is a financial platform built specifically for modern digital businesses. The thing most people will fixate on is the fact that you can get uncapped cashback on all of your expenses. Because unlike a lot of these programs where the categories are pretty much useless to all of us, Incard gives you 2% cashback on things that actually make up your cost base. Things like SaaS, ad spend, travel, and lots more. The things that you're just going to pay for anyway to allow your business to run and grow. Money back on your existing outgoings. And if you're anything like most of our clients, that's going to be a lot. and it's going to add up fast. And it's not just cashback. Corporate cards with multi-currency accounts, a proper connected banking experience, and direct integrations with things like Shopify, Xero, Stripe, and lots more. All in one place. And if you've ever had 15 tabs open, working from about 3 different bank accounts, and a spreadsheet that nobody's touched in 3 weeks, just trying to get a full picture of where your money actually is, then that's the problem that this solves. One connected view, your whole financial experience in one place. Brands like Azio Beauty and Hello Paris are already scaling with this. So if you're spending serious money on daily expenses and getting absolutely nothing back on it right now, you're going to want to look into this. Back to the episode.
Yeah, for sure. Seeing this more and more, and I think transparently, like we're seeing a lot of brands that we work with now that are starting to use methods like this to drive, to create that flywheel at scale. So essentially, it's all about how you can create a creator flywheel and lower your cost per creative and create this kind of compounding effect that can be utilized across multiple different channels. So essentially, it's this idea of being able to seed hundreds of creators through TikTok. You pay them a small fee plus commission to be able to use that creative on other platforms, but then you are able to incentivize them you're able to incentivize them to reach certain milestones. That could be in relation to volume, GMV, other things that will then in turn be able to drive this kind of creator armory essentially that can be used across multiple different platforms. So I think I'm going to use like the Comfort founder as an example because he I think has over 500,000 affiliates now that work directly with them, and it's super interesting. Like I was on their ad library the other day, and I filtered by highest impression ads. Their top 5 highest impression ads are affiliate ads that are just calling out affiliates.
Really?
Not even like ads of them selling their products. So that kind of shows you like where they're actually driving, likely most of their revenue from. But his whole method, obviously, they're finding creators through different means, right? So they essentially have creator coordinators that work directly with them. They use things like ManyChat for where they've kind of created these chat funnels where they're able to actually trigger DMs to these creators. And then also, obviously, they're approaching people through TikTok Shop as well. And what they are doing is they're creating these kind of communities where they are incentivizing them to post 10, 15 times a day for 45 days. And they call it like the 45-day challenge. And if you reach it, they'll essentially pay you a bonus off the back of it. And then if you reach certain levels of GMV, you earn more commission off the back of that. So it kind of creates this whole flywheel where it compounds at scale because the creators within this group of people are feeding in new ideas. They're able to execute them at scale by driving volume. And I know that this brand, and I know this is an extreme example, but they are able to create hundreds of thousands of ads every single month at a fraction of the price that you would pay a UGC creator. And you're benefiting off that in multiple different ways. The reach and I guess more top of funnel reach that you would be able to drive through TikTok that then would translate into, search traffic and feed into Meta. That then being able to be utilized as Meta creative. And I think that idea of being able to lock in a loyalty system that you can drive bonuses through is a way that can gamify it at scale. So it's definitely not one for the faint-hearted because I think operationally it can be very complex, but you don't need to do it to the same level that maybe Comfort have. You could do it on a smaller scale that is more contained.
Yeah, you're seeing more. I think more and more brands are deploying this method. I think there's a couple in the UK that have done it really well as well. I think Overload do quite a bit of this, if I'm correct, but don't know from what I've seen anyway. I think the key is that gamification and reward scheme and making it really incentive aligned for these creators, because more and more brands are going to do it. So like, how do you get the better creators to work with your business? You're seeing, I think I saw Shark, Ninja, they've started taking a lot of the top affiliates for like to events and hosting these big events for them, which I think is another evolution of this. But just the sheer volume and variety of content that you're seeing brands generate, and the scale of organic and paid awareness is just crazy.
Yeah.
I think that's been one of the main drivers of Comfort hitting that sort of just that massive, like crazy growth journey in terms of revenue.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, if you can like guarantee the reward, and essentially then it's like you can help them crack the code. You can help drive them towards the reward. So yeah, I think super interesting. I think the thing that we've all obviously spoken about on top of that is how can you enhance their chances of succeeding through that. So we, being able to like have someone that can jump on a call with all of your creators on a weekly basis, or being able to feed insights back into the system. So then they are heightening their chances of actually, finding a winner with one of these ads. Is also a good way to to help kind of build that relationship.
Seeing more tech come out like that's allowing brands to bring that level of like transparency and tracking and accountability to Meta that you can see on TikTok Shop as well. So like attribution tools where you can onboard creators and track percentage of spend into your Meta account, and then obviously incentivize them directly in that way as well. It'll be interesting to see how this continues to develop. And I think it's that, obviously the second point I put here is that TikTok Shop into Meta, which is like the starting point of this, I think, for brands. If you want to do it in a more like simple way, like a version 1 would be just getting cracking with TikTok Shop and using it not only as a revenue generation engine, but mainly using it for affiliate creative that you can then pull into Meta and scale. And then off the back of that, starting to build the more tiered structure that Comfort have built out over time.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Next, we've got creative volume.
Yeah.
So this idea of, we've spoken about this a lot, but it's the idea, there's this kind of constant debate about volume versus intention. But
Yeah.
I think you can have volume with intention, right? And I think that's where we're going with here.
Yeah, I saw Northbeam put out a really interesting post about the sheer volume of ads that their top 1% of advertisers, the top 1% of ad accounts are responsible for 36% of all ad creative on Meta. So top 1.4%. So the median advertiser is running 23 different ads at a time. The medium Northbeam customer is running 150 ads. So like they're stating that top percentile is just doing so much more volume, and therefore it's creating so much more scale. I think the apprehension and the reason that people are pushing back on this is I think it's difficult to connect strategy and volume together with the right intention. We've spoken about that a lot. And therefore you can start to see like real diminishing returns as you scale up volume of output. But that doesn't mean that it's not the right approach. It just means the system is complex and the intention needs to be there behind it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the big thing here is gap analysis, because that's what's going to identify if you're over indexing into either a persona, a vehicle, type of messaging. These are all of the things that you need to make sure that if you're looking at it on a heat map, that you are really spreading yourself across all of these areas, or otherwise you're going to be too oversaturated in and then as a result diminishing incremental reach. So it's what I would recommend even doing, and it's very easy now to like build a skill on Claude where you can connect Meta's API. I think be careful because you can get banned if you do it wrong.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to do that now. If you are clear with your naming conventions, you can directly pull that creative and start looking at things like, are we diversifying across all of our personas? Are we actually tapping into all of the emotional zones within the valence heat map? Are we actually speaking to people through different vehicles? Because I think I was speaking to a brand the other day and they thought that they had real vehicle diversity. But then if you actually run that through a tool like we've built, it actually identified that it saw most of the ads as the same, and it didn't actually see them because the differences were so subtle that it didn't actually differentiate. So I think these are like the different variants that you need to be looking at to ensure that you are diversifying as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think I still think the language and tone and valence zones is one that almost every brand we encounter is missing at least one of the core quadrants in that process. So I 100% agree with the gap analysis, and it's just making sure that you've got those 2 KPIs running across the process, like hit rate or average spend per asset or whatever the measure of quality you want is, whilst you also scale volume. But it is the thing that's coming up the most on calls with brands right now, is that they feel like they're in like a creative echo chamber, or they're just struggling to. They feel like they're just doing more and not better. So it's a common problem, and it really does need a detailed and intentional system to connect the two together.
Yeah, and it's not. That's the thing. If you lower spend and you're not driving as much volume, it's not as important, but it becomes much more important with scale. So the sooner that you can kind of build a system that allows you to exercise that, the quicker you'll be able to increase spend. But like, I just want to go into some of these areas that you need to be thinking about that will help determine whether you are over-indexing in one of these areas. So firstly, thinking about persona coverage. How many distinct persona clusters do you have? Now, obviously, this differs based on your volume of spend. But really, you should be looking at, if you're spending over 100K a month, you need to be looking at, in terms of macro personas, at least 4 to 5 macros, and then obviously more micros off the back of that. Are all 3 identity angles covered? So that's actual self. So how am I feeling in the moment? I'm sitting in the pain. Or self, which is, how am I feeling about my partner who I could be motivated to buy something for? Or ideal self, the more sitting in the after state. What do the motivation for actually wanting to feel something, wanting to get to a solution. Now, one thing you'll know about that, if you look at these identity angles in your ad account, and if you actually label each creative against, I would say probably 90% of your creative is in actual self. So that's a big one to look at. And there's some big opportunities there to go into, or an ideal. And then looking at spend concentration by persona. If you look into your ad account and you see that actually, yeah, we're covering 5-6 personas, but 80% of spend is going into persona 1, you know that maybe there's not enough coverage of some of these other personas. The second one is messaging diversity, as we spoke about before. So we've spoken about valence zones. As I said, Sarah Levenger has a great article on this. Literally take that article, transcribe it, put it into Claude. If you've got a skill that is connected to your Meta API, ask it to do a scrape, and actually just try and build a bit of a heat map of where your creatives sit in each of these zones. You will find that there are zones that aren't even being targeted yet. Distinct messaging angles as well. So, how many different messaging angles are you covering? Awareness level coverage is another one that we've spoken about, because you might have diverse messaging, but it all might be messaging that sits, solution aware down. And then also another one that I haven't really spoken about much on this podcast, but I did this for Club Neuro recently, and it really uncovered an interesting insight that we were over leveraged in an emotional driver. So when we're looking at emotional drivers, we're looking at it through achievement, belonging, autonomy, and empowerment. What I realized after doing that gap analysis was that there was zero creative that sat in empowerment, that sat in belonging, which for like Club Neuro, which is all about belonging and community and, being a part of something, was a real concern. And that actually is the biggest potential opportunity in terms of how we could be speaking to those customers. So again, that really identified an opportunity there for us to diversify and allow us to drive more volume as a result of that. And then I think when you get on to like volume and velocity, looking at things like how many ads have we launched in the last 30 days is volume sufficient to hit target spend? Now, I don't know if you want to speak to that for a moment. I know we've done a whole episode on like how to identify the amount of volume for spend, but
yeah, go back to the creative forecasting masterclass I did a couple of weeks ago, and there's a detailed Notion doc of how to map that out. I think the key here is do the quality before you do the volume. So run that process, get a measure of hit rate, reflect on your data, decide whether you need to make the process work harder first or just do more volume. But you should be able to build an expectation of how many ads do you need to launch every week, 2 weeks, 30 days to hit your spend target for the rest of the year, and avoid leaving yourself short by making proactive decisions to resource that two months before you need to get the asset volume in place. I think most brands are still making far less ads than they need to be. Not as many as they should be based on their spend targets, and especially as we're getting closer and closer to Q4, when spend really ramps up for a lot of categories, that needs to be top of mind.
Yeah. Next one is format and vehicle. So like, I would just go through your ad account and like, you know, even if you do this manually, count how many different types of vehicles there are, and we would determine a vehicle by is a way that you deliver a message inside each format. So if you've got Hyperod, UGC, static as each format, you'll have different vehicles that live within that. So a vehicle for a UGC would be a whiteboard ad or a raw face-to-camera testimonial, as an example. So count how many of those do you have, and if there's not enough, then again, that's an area where we need to be driving more diversity. I also think like, look, if there's like a lot of spend that's being driven through one vehicle specifically. I've seen this quite a lot where brands will, you know, almost do it subconsciously, where they over leverage one vehicle because they see that it's working time and time again. And they almost get it in their head, oh no, this is just the type of ad that works for us. But actually it's just because we're not putting enough resource into testing, you know, more diversity.
I think that's the issue of confirmation bias, or like tunneling down into one type of vehicle. We've actually just had a client really push towards this in the last couple of weeks. And it'll maybe help in the short term, but you've got to keep 20% of your creative output on new, different things you've never tried before for that reason.
Yeah, it's always when that's how you see that brands will hit a ceiling. It's always because there's not a willingness to be able to diversify vehicles, because they think, one, as you said, confirmation bias, but then second to that, it's they don't want to break outside of what they feel sits outside of their brand, essentially. Another thing that is super interesting to do is looking at how many personas are served by different vehicles. So if you've got a list of like your top 10 vehicles that you've tested, almost create like a heat map of, have we tested those vehicles on all 6 of our personas? And if not, that is a really good opportunity or a quick win, low hanging fruit, to test those vehicles against different personas or different messaging angles. Because usually you'll see, oh no, we've done it over here, but there's all of these personas that we have already validated that we've not tested those vehicles on.
Yeah, 100%. And the final one I wanted to touch on before we move on is just like concentration and lifespan. So like reviewing your current inventory and how much like risk sits within top ads. You want to be avoiding a single ad taking more than 20% of spend. Looking at like what's the replacement rate of churn creative, and really treating it as a portfolio. I think that's how to think of an ad library over time. I think that's something, again, brands are not reflecting on enough. Like, what's the quality of that ad library, and how is it improving with the work that you're doing on the actual creative output? So we sat on that for a while. I just wanted to, do you want to quickly touch on the hit rate case study? Because I kind of segues off that.
Yeah, I think it's just a good example. I won't stay on this for long, but a great example where this happened within one of our ad accounts, and we were over leveraged in in actual self messaging, and only one zone within the psychological heat maps that we discussed. So we did a bit of an analysis and actually broke down macro personas into deeper micro personas to really understand their motivators and fears. And then we adapted the psychological messaging to ensure that we were covering ourselves across that whole heat map. So just two simple changes there, introduction of more micro personas that spoke to the macro personas, but in a way that was much more specific to a certain type of person within that. And then more a gap analysis from a psychological messaging standpoint to really kind of unlock the gaps that we hadn't yet explored. And I think the third thing that isn't on these notes, but really is important off the back of this, if you are, and I've seen this before, where creative strategists will be super intentional in a creative strategy and actually build these micro personas, really understand the person, how to speak to them and what their fears are and their desires. But then actually when you get to the point of writing a script, it just feels very surface level. It's not obvious that you're speaking to that persona. And I think with this one, a great example was we spoke about this on the episode with Chris, it was so obvious, even from a static, exactly who that person was, down to their hobbies, that it meant that Meta had the signals to be able to put it in front of the right consumer. And that comes back to that soulmate theory that we've spoken about.
Yeah, I just think it's a great case study of applying all of the bits we've covered over the last couple of months into transforming an account in a very short period of time. It's like turning that theory into action. So it's great to just recap that. Another point that's all over Twitter and quite a common narrative right now is this distaste for iterations.
Yeah.
As after post Andromeda, and we've touched on this previously, but we're still seeing iterations drive really significant impact in a number of accounts. We did kind of cross business analysis of our iteration workflow. And I know the key area we're seeing it really work is through the lens of a format multiplier, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, we talk about this a lot in with our creative strategy team. And it's if you have found a vehicle or format that has really worked for one persona, rather than when you're introducing a new persona, reducing your chances of success by essentially changing more variables, take the winning vehicle and just apply it to a new persona as a way of validating that. And we've done that at scale for lots of different brands, and it works really, really well. And an example, we did this with Club Neuro, and it was a 3 reasons why, very simple style creative, but we saw that it really worked for one persona. And obviously it's a very new ad account. So there were multiple personas that I hadn't yet validated or tested that I wanted to bring into the ad account, but I wanted to, especially with the amount of budget that we had available to us, I wanted to reduce the chances of wasting that budget essentially. So I essentially took the exact same framework and the vehicle that we have validated, and then applied a different persona and valence messaging to that. And by doing that, we did it 4 different times and it worked every single time. So it shows it's a good way of validating a persona and then almost creating this tree off the back of it that then you can test against that.
Yeah, nice. I think we talked about that on the Alex episode, that brand that had just used basically the same concept to scale to 9 figures nearly, which is an example of taking something that's worked and really pushing it to the extreme. We also were chatting in the office yesterday around taking angles and messaging that's worked from another business and pulling it into your brand, another audience, another persona, but then using Gemini and Claude to adapt a script to your own product or proposition.
Yeah.
What's the process behind that?
Yeah, so I think, again, I hate, and we've spoken a lot about this, going to actual direct competitors and just pulling their scripts, because it just becomes an echo chamber.
Yeah.
But I'm a big believer of taking winning scripts, either mainly through organic, I think work a lot better, or going to brands that aren't direct competitors of yours, as an opportunity to test more vehicle diversity and taking vehicles and frameworks and applying them to your brand. Essentially just putting it into Gemini, asking it to translate it into a framework, And then from that, you can essentially take one of your winning scripts and ask it to apply it to that exact framework with an exact angle, valence zone, and persona. And it will be able to do a really good job at just placing it within the framework that you can then test against your brand.
Yeah, I like that for looking at products that solve a similar problem. So speaking to a bedding brand recently and push them to go and look at sort of sleep supplements, because a lot of the outcomes, they were selling a bedding that really helped with like hot sleeping in summer. So it's like the outcome in the customer wants, the failed previous solution, the emotional reactions will be very similar because you're solving the same problem. But the way they'll be packaging that up will be so different that it's quite interesting to take inspiration in that way.
It's a really good example. So I know you've been going deep on landers and post-click.
Post-click, yeah. Just think this is the next frontier. Like, we're starting to do some work with clients. I think it's super exciting. It's something I really enjoy spending time on is sort of post-click and funnels as an area of the marketing ecosystem. So I saw David Herman tweet about it, how like taking proven creative winners and scaling them into new landers is helping with incremental reach, and that belief that like a landing page is part of that creative diversity mix. It definitely seems to be the case, and it makes sense because Meta crawls not only the creative and the landing page, it's getting more sophisticated. You can see how that can sort of support the algorithm is built off the concept of expected action rate. So if you can improve landing page performance, funnel throughput, then it'll improve CPM, it'll improve bids, you'll win more auctions, etc. And I think when you look at the playbook, some of the biggest brands in the space and the fastest growing brands in the space have applied over the last 12 months. Grunz, IM8, Mars of Men, top of mind. I know they're all supplements. Loop, Kind Patches, so many others. They always come out the gates, not only with creative, but with so many customer journeys. And it's all through the view of like persona or need state, funnel, and that alignment through that journey. And I just think the competency level, hopefully if you've been watching this podcast, hopefully your competency level has increased in creative over the last 12 months, or last 18 months. I think the market is getting better and more sophisticated in that area, but I don't think many brands are connecting landing pages at scale because it's another element of complexity. I think it's most impactful across problem and unaware stages. There's greatest upside. I also think it's where like they can often be the most needed because you can only do so much education in a 40 to 45 second to 2.5 minute video. But you can use them all the way through comparison pages, PDP improvements that align a PDP more with a persona. And I just think this is going to be something that develops rapidly over the next sort of 6 to 12 months. Obviously, there's a lot of brands, agencies that are doing it very well. We're starting to roll this out with a couple of our partners. Claude, it's actually amazing it's amazing how far you can get with Claude one-shotting now. So using Claude design, creating a GitHub that like codifies your brand guidelines and your visual identity, what good looks like historically from like a website blocks perspective, and then some reference points for great pages. You can pretty much one-shot landers. You can pretty much one-shot PDPs, advertorials, listicles, quiz funnels. I was one-shot a quiz funnel last night and it was nearly perfect. So you assume that's going to get even better, but it brings into focus the strategy, right, and the approach to doing it well. And it as with creative, it has personas as the foundation. So same persona and micro persona should connect all the way through the system. You should prioritize based on spend volume by persona and micro persona. You can actually do it quite easily by just taking sort of either using Claude or taking top 20 ads and running it through Gemini and just asking it to split by persona against your creative OS, and then start to build a bit of a strategy off that, like aligning some PDPs, duplicating PDPs, thinking about, I really like things like 5 reasons why, 7 reasons why, because they're such a formulaic approach to education.
It's very digestible as well.
Yeah, it's really easy to do, like executionally. It's not very complex to just break a product out into 7 reasons why someone should buy it. You just go benefit, common objection, social proof, CTA. It's like the angle's quite self-explanatory. But we're seeing more and more of these different customer journeys. Like, I think they've been around. Brands have been doing them for years, but I think we're seeing them done at a higher volume, with more of a thought process around the creative that connects to it, and a greater level of diversity, with things like quiz funnels becoming a really big part of the strategy for quite a few different brands.
Talk on quiz funnels, because I think this is something I'm seeing more and more, and it's super interesting. I know there's been times where we tried it in the past and it hasn't quite worked as it seems to be now for some brands.
Yeah, so looking at Mars of Men, rather than talking theoretically, I'll just walk through an example. It's like their landing page is find out what's really suppressing your testosterone, take this 2-minute assessment, social proof, and then it starts with like, how old are you? What's the one thing you'd fix about your masculine health first? And then it's all of the benefits, and you just select a benefit. How would you describe your build right now? How's your strength training trending lately? And it's just, then it's got like before and afters. So yeah, just super thought out and intentional. Lots of social proof throughout the journey. Lots of common failed solutions, benefits. And then it feels like you're building like a custom solution to your problem rather than just serving you the same product.
Yeah.
So I think they're really impactful as a funnel type, but I just don't think brands are doing enough here in terms of testing and optimizing, starting with the PDP and improving that. And I think that's a separate workflow to the landers above it. But when you can connect the dots at scale, it's super powerful. Gets such a massive improvement in performance and volume.
It's just, again, like a build on personas, isn't it? It's you know, it's like if you're super specific with your persona targeting on Meta, but then post-click, it's like a generic PDP. Like it kind of, you know, loses the impact. So yeah, it really helps with that full funnel strategy.
It's just translating conviction and building continuity and trust. So I think I would encourage everybody watching to do that process of just pulling out those top 2 personas and thinking, how do I start? Do I need to do a step page? Is conversion rate telling me that there needs to be a big change in education, or can I just reorientate some of the things on my PDP to be more aligned to the buyer that's coming through this type of creative?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the final thing on landers is that whole perceived value and increased average order value, and how you're seeing more brands re-engineer their offer to drive higher average order value through improving value perception of the product. An example of this being IM8's recent move, or somewhat recent move, to a 3-month sub on the front end as their main offer.
What did that move from?
1 month.
Just rolling.
Yeah, 1 month rolling to 3 months up front, delivered monthly. Danny, in the podcast episode we did, discussed how significant an improvement on the AOV and LTV that, he didn't touch on LTV because it was too early, but transform their average order value. And they've done it through the lens of like engineering the value perception of the product through so many different monthly gifts, benefits. They've obviously released this like 90-day IM8 transformation program where you get masterclasses quarterly for those people who are on that quarterly subscription. It's all about how, although the price has increased, it's like increasing the perception of value of the product beyond the price, so that the pain the customer feels is greater than the value, the price that they're going to have to pay for the solution to that pain. Again, I think offer is a bit of a dirty word in e-com, but when you're thinking through the lens of perceived value, how do we increase the perceived value of our products within the customer's eyes to allow us to charge more, to increase our average order value. I think we're seeing a lot of brands unlock a lot more volume when doing this well, because it allows you to spend more on Meta. So it increases your allowable CAC. You can win more auctions. You can generate more. You can just spend more. And that often will almost always, if you increase AOV, it'll increase the LTV of those cohorts as well. So I think there's a lot of value there. Maybe a follow-up masterclass we can do around that.
Yeah, super interesting. I feel like, you did a great session with the team that brought in some of this, and just offer is something we don't speak about much. So I think that would be valuable.
It's like it is the ceiling. It's like if you're not, I think with the business you need to forecast how are you going to increase average order value every quarter. Like what's the strategy that sits on the AOV line of the P&L? Because you are just going to hit a ceiling if you don't manage to do that.
Yeah.
A lot of I guess AOV and LTV if you're working on a payback period. But yeah, I can do a session on that maybe moving forward. I think we've chewed through a lot there.
Yeah, it's always good to get these little shoot the shit episodes in the diary. I think we need to do them more.
Yeah.
Because they always go down well. But yeah, I think that's everything. I think we can end it there.
Yeah, well, thank you for watching. We'll be following up with more solos, like Lucas said, over the coming months. If you haven't already and you've stuck with us to the end, please do like and subscribe. We've just passed 5K. It'd be appreciated.
And we're going to have loads of bite-sized masterminds coming.
Yeah, looking forward to that. So yeah, thank you for watching.